Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the event of Jesus' second coming and the moment of our own resurrection and of judgment. And we're looking at the gospel accounts, what Jesus says in the gospels about that moment. And then we're going to look as well at what Peter and Paul and John have to say about it. And we'll see that it's consistent throughout. We're in Luke's gospel. Um, Mark, of course, is the earliest, almost certainly. Matthew maybe. Mark is almost certainly the earliest gospel to be written down. Um, and um, and Mark's gospel, and also in Matthew's gospel, Matthew gives a much fuller account. In Mark's gospel and in Matthew's gospel, we have um, the 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 report of that last major sermon that Jesus gave on the last week he was alive, there on the Mount of Olives, as they were looking across to the west at the sun setting over the temple. And Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple and also what happens at the end of time. And we have just a very small um, description of that in Luke's gospel. But we also have some detail we didn't have before, some real color to our imagination so that we can create it in our mind's eye. So let's look at Luke's gospel verses 34 through 38 and talk about the detail and talk about the themes that we have and I may not take my full 5 today, but I owe you so much time over these last 3 or 4 years that it will just be a drop in the bucket of me repaying you for the time I've taken. Luke chapter 22, we're going to be reading 5 verses, verses 34 through 38. Be on guard. Well, let's go back and look at verse 32. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on your guard. Word for word, what we've already read in Matthew and Mark. But there's not the distinction, not with the line, but of that day and hour. We don't have that phrase, but of that day and hour in Luke's gospel. Be on your guard that your hearts may not be weighted down with dissipation, drunkenness, the worries of life, and that day come on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all those who dwell on the face of all the earth. But keep on the alert at all times, praying in order that you may have strength to escape these things that are about to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. Now during the day he was teaching in the temple, but at evening he would go out and spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet. And all the people would get up early in the morning and come to him in the temple and listen to him. Okay, so the detail of verses 37 and 38, that we don't have that otherwise. That Jesus was camping out at this point. He was camping out on the Mount of Olives and then going back into Jerusalem every morning, and people knew he was going to be there and they would gather to hear him that final week. So we have the same thing that we had before, and we have a really good summary. We don't have that key phrase, but of that day and hour. But we do have the notion, um, verse 35, that that we're talking about a separate event, because in verse 31 or 32, excuse me, he's talking about an event that some of them, this generation, will experience. And in verse 35, he makes it clear he's talking about an event that all those who dwell on the face of the earth will experience. So even in Luke's gospel, even though we don't have that phrase, but of that day and hour, we still have the clear distinction made between the 2 days. Notice how, he doesn't give the parable about the householder that went away. Um, in Matthew's gospel, um, Jesus emphasizes the dissipation of the servants left behind, and in Mark's gospel, there is the emphasis on people not being at their task, but being distracted from their task, or just lazy at their task, and how Luke talks about both. And perhaps in Luke we understand that that what Jesus said included both applications, both the Matthew application and the Mark application, because in the summary, we've talked about ipsissima verba and ipsissima vox before, the very words and the very voice. Is what we have in the Gospels sometimes the summary of what Jesus said, or is it the actual transcript? And clearly in Luke, we're getting the summary of what Jesus said. Be on your guard that your hearts may not be weighted down with dissipation and drunkenness. There's the sinfulness, or the worries of life. Don't be distracted from your task, but be on task. Be moral. Be living a moral life and be on task. And then there's the emphasis to be on the alert that it's going to be a surprise, and that we have to use prayer to prepare. Prayer is part of our preparation, a necessary part, because one day we're all going to stand before Jesus in judgment. What will your answer be? The old hymn, one day we'll stand at the bar on high. And Jesus literally says that. So and calls himself the Son of Man here. You remember John describes seeing one like a son of man. That phrase comes from Daniel chapter 7, verse 12. And again, we're having that phrase describing the person that we'll see at judgment. Anyway, it's real brief, but Luke is Luke of all the New Testament writers is the polished stylist. He's the guy that's done the researched biography. He tells us that in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 1, and it reads like somebody who took years to research, to talk to eyewitnesses. Verses 37 and 38 sounds like something he heard from someone who was there. And anyway, we're just blessed to have all three Gospels to give us the account of what Jesus said that last week. We're going to look at Paul, then Peter, then John coming up. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.